So today I'm here to talk about how prepared were Africans on the eve of colonialism. How prepared were our ancestors when the colonial masters stormed the African continent? I am making this video due to the general misconception that most people have about Africa. They tend to believe that on the eve of colonialism, Africans were cowards, our ancestors were afraid, and then they didn't stand to fight or resist colonial incursion. However, that is not the truth, as we already have it documented in very many African books that Africans were very brave. Our ancestors stood and they resisted colonial incursion. Although they were overpowered due to their little technological advancement at that period in time, because they did not have the technology that could match that of the colonial masters, and that was why very many of the Africans who fought and resisted colonial incursions were defeated. But to think that Africans did not stand to resist colonial incursion is, however, a very huge misconception that I actually want to debunk today, by showing you some examples of Africans who stood and then who resisted colonial incursion. Now, one example we have is in 1891, the Prempe of Ashanti Kingdom, current-day Ghana. When approached by the British, here are his words and here is what he replied to say. Now, to quote his words, he replied, "The suggestion that Ashanti in its present state should come and enjoy the protection of Her Majesty and Queen and Empress of India, I may say, is a matter of very serious consideration, and which I am happy to say that we have arrived at this conclusion, that my kingdom of Ashanti will never commit itself to any such policy. Ashanti must remain as of old, at the same time to remain friendly with all white men." This is the reply that the Prempe of Ashanti Kingdom, current-day Ghana, gave to the British Empire. Also, not only that, we also have another example in 1895, whereby the king of Mosi Kingdom, located in the present-day Burkina Faso, also gave the French his own reply as to not agreeing to the French terms that was proposed to him during that period in time. Reason is because they perceived and they suspected that such proposition would lead to the overtaking and eventual taking over of their own land. And so here is the reply he gave to the French. "I know the whites wish to kill me in order to take my country, and yet you claim that they will help me to organize my country. But I find my country good just as it is. I have no need of them. I know what is necessary for me and what I want. I have my own merchants. Also consider yourself fortunate that I do not order your heads to be cut off. Go away now, and above all, never come back." Bold statements, bold responses that actually showed that Africans were not cowards, nor were the kings afraid of colonial incursion. They oftentimes rejected the proposals of the whites, of which they found out to be very sneaky and slippery, and they knew that behind the proposals were ulterior motives that would not be beneficial to the African kingdom. Now, these are not the only examples. These are not the only examples that exist on Africans that actually resisted colonial incursion. If you read Nigerian history in 1892, Ijebu expedition, you will see that very many Nigerians living in that period in time resisted colonial incursion, although they were overpowered. Also, you would read about the Ekumeku underground rebellion, of which they did not actually take the colonialists with friendly face, and so they resisted by all means possible as they would. Also, in very many regions, even after colonialism had been established in African regions, they still fought, and then there were very many different uprisings, of which we know some of which, like the Mau Mau uprising, the Bambanta rebellion, even in Nigeria 1929, the Aba Women Riot, very different many uprisings against colonial oppressions and colonial incursions. Now, one point to make is this: some people will argue and say that, okay, the Africans resisted, and so why then did colonialism come into effect? That is a brilliant question to ask, and here's the response. Now, I always go back to slavery. Reason I always do that is because if we do not know how some things happen, we cannot get the right answers. Now, ask yourself, during slavery, when Africans were exchanging slaves to the Europeans, what did they get in return? They got firearms, they got guns, they got gunpowders. Most of these things they got. They did not know that after slavery had been abolished, Europeans had attained industrialization, and that most of those guns of which they had already bought from the Europeans in order to use in the slave raiding and also to secure their territories, they did not know that these weapons had become outdated. And so while the Europeans were planning on coming to take over Africa, very many Africans were prepared with these very many guns that they had already amassed during the period of slavery. And so in their minds, they expected that the Europeans were going to come and face them with the same guns of which they had purchased from the Europeans. And so Africans, aside the guns, they had their different incantations, their gods and deities of which they believed in. Coupled with all of these, they expected that if the Europeans show up, they would definitely defeat the Europeans, as they have done some 200-300 years before that period in time. But unfortunately, the Europeans had already gotten the Maxim guns, the machine guns of which could fire maybe 6 times before African guns or African local guns could even think of firing back at their enemies. And so when the white men stormed Africa with the Maxim guns, they killed the hell out of Africans, even though Africans were courageous and even though Africans resisted with courage and with bravery and with boldness like never before. However, it is important to know that although very many African countries were defeated and overtaken, one country stands out, and that country's name is Ethiopia. King Menelik was the ruler of Ethiopia at that period in time, and he, together with his vibrant people and vibrant soldiers, were able to resist colonial incursion from the Italians, and that was a very big victory. That was a resounding victory that still continues to echo in the minds of every African when we read our past history. So that is it for today, and I hope that you now understand that you can defend Africans and our ancestors when this particular notion comes up, and you can be able to say that once upon a time, although we were actually being oppressed and overtaken, but yet our ancestors were not cowards and they resisted colonial incursion with bravery, with courage. The only reason why they were defeated was because they did not have advanced technology that could match their own enemies. So that will be all for today, and I'll see you next time.